Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to this evening's conversation, Candid Conversation of MCHR, Michigan Coalition for Human Rights. And we are reimagining human rights in this dispensation. I am Tia Taylor, and I am one of the co-chairs for the Michigan Coalition for Human Rights. And just a little bit about our mission. Michigan Coalition for Human Rights promotes awareness of, commitment to, and advocacy for human rights and the environmental rights of planet Earth through education, community organization, and action. MCHR opposes forces that suppress human dignity, freedom, and justice locally and around the world. And so we are taking action tonight. Of course, we are educating, and we have such a dynamic topic this evening. One of our key, oh my goodness, beautiful board members, Julie Hurwitz, is with us, and she has two other guests. I really want to bring her on right away so she can talk about the action that she's doing in our community. And it's very important to know that with Michigan Coalition for Human Rights, we want you to stay active where you are and bring that action to a coalition so that we can work together to support one another in the efforts that we're doing on different levels, at different places, different platforms. But we know that together we are powerful and we can make a difference. All right, we're going to have Julie come on. Hi,
Hi there.
Julie.
It's great to be here. I'm very excited about this conversation we're about to have.
Yes, Julie, I'm so happy to have you this evening. I was going to go on and on about you, but as always, we want you to kind of just do a little spiel about yourself and what brought you to Michigan Coalition for Human Rights. You are a longtime member and look, a mentor, a leader in our community. And so just tell us a little bit about your encounters with Michigan Coalition for Human Rights and the beginnings.
Well, I have been a longtime supporter of MCHR for years and years. And Carrie McGee, about, I don't know, 10 years ago or so, approached me and asked me if I would be willing to sit on the board, which I have done. And I have been a member of the board ever since. And I am just thrilled with the work that MCHR does. It's so important in pulling together so many different issues under one umbrella. And I love our new co-chairs, Tia and Chancy.
Chantel.
Chantel, God. Tia and Chantel. And I'm really looking forward to a positive future going forward. So,
Yes,
and I'm looking forward to this conversation tonight.
I am too. I'm so excited. Um, so Julie, you want to let's bring on the other two guests,
Sure.
one
Well,
guest at a
I
time.
will add one other thing, that
Yes,
my involvement in MCHR, that it being a coalition, comes through my longtime membership and involvement with the National Lawyers Guild, which is one of
yes,
the coalition members of MCHR.
and yes, and Julie, because as a lawyer, you have been out there advocating for people for human rights, even in your position.
In the work that I do on a daily basis.
On
That's
a
correct.
daily basis. Yes, it's who you are.
As best as I can, yes.
Yes, yes. Wonderful. Okay, so you want to say a little bit about the topic, or you just want to bring on our guest?
Sure. The topic we're going to be discussing this evening is it sort of came to mind in the face of the horrific tragedy and travesty in violation of human rights that's occurring in Gaza. And the dialogue in this country that has evolved around what is anti-Semitism and the ways in which the those in power in our country have attempted to weaponize the concept of anti-Semitism to start broadening the definition so widely that I would be, as someone who is Jewish, who grew up in a Jewish household with Jewish education, but am anti-Zionist, this definition will label me an anti-Semite. And that is what is terrifying. And there's also, and I guess I'd like to bring Hannah and Barbara on before I go any further, because I'm sure they have quite a bit to say about this topic themselves. I know they do. So.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Hi, Hannah.
Hi.
Hello, Barbara.
Hi, Tia.
Hi, Hannah and Barbara.
Julie and Hannah. Nice to be here.
So, to get the discussion going, I was starting to explain to our audience how we got to this topic as one to be discussed tonight. And we are looking at a situation right now in this country where we have the rise of anti-Semitism for real. That is very frightening and very reminiscent of what occurred in the 30s and 40s in Europe. At the same time, we have the right wing grasping this term, anti-Semitism, and trying to use it and weaponize it and criminalize those of us who are fighting vigorously against the horrors that are being committed by the Zionist state of Israel in Gaza. And those of us in the Jewish community who are not Zionists and who oppose Zionism politically are now in this tenuous position of, on the one hand, being the target of both the Jewish community and the far right community, and all sort of falling under this very horrible definition of what is considered to be anti-Semitism. And so with that, to start things off, I guess we should open the floor for Hannah and Barbara to speak up and add to what I've said or to elaborate on what I just have been talking about. So,
well, maybe we can include some definitions for people who may not be familiar with the terms of anti-Semitism and the terms of Zionism. As Julie was starting to say, she grew up in a household which was very Jewish and very Zionist. Is that correct, Julie?
To a point.
Okay. Well, I did. I grew up in an almost all Jewish neighborhood in New York, and Israel was glorified at every moment. I mean, Jewish people were given the right to own Israel. The word Palestinian, when I was a child, didn't even enter into the conversation. It was this land, our people went through a Holocaust. Millions of people were killed, and those who could survive and the Holocaust were given this land, which was a desert, to turn it into milk and honey. It was a people without a land and a land without a people. And we were fed this narrative, and I think most people in this country were fed this narrative, but especially the Jewish kids were fed this narrative that we had the right to the land of Israel, and there was nobody else there that mattered. So, but that we know is not the case. Several years before I was born, in 1948, 76 years ago, 750,000 Palestinians were forcefully expelled from their homes. And their homes were confiscated, they were destroyed, their lives were turned upside down, their careers, their education, everything was stripped from them. 500 villages were destroyed, burned, olive orchards were burned, and Jewish people started building settlements, taking over homes, and thinking that, well, we were here thousands of years ago and God gave this land to the Jewish people. That's what Zionism, is
Premise.
about, that we were given, Jewish people were given this land and we're going to take it back. So that's a very rough summary of what we were brought up to believe versus what was actually happening. And
Hannah,
I'm going to turn it over to Hannah so she can explain.
I just want to clarify one thing. I don't know if anyone here can speak to it more, but I think that the description that Barbara just gave of what Zionism is, I think that that's like Jewish Zionism. And there are other types of Zionism that were even developed before that narrative was developed and administered. And I think that's like a really important piece of the situation, that Jewish Zionism is like a significant force, but also like Christian nationalist Zionism is also a big force, and also just like Europeans wanting Jews out of there was a big force, and like that those were Zionist movements and our movements.
So, Hannah, why don't you share with us some of, you're a few years younger than Barbara is, and I, and so why don't you share some of your experience growing up and how you are, in understanding and experiencing what's going on right now with this whole use of anti-Zionism as a weapon and as a right-wing strategy to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of don't think it's anything new to use like to sort of like position Jewish people in a way that like doesn't actually like, that won't ultimately like serve to their safety or interests at all. I mean, this is what like, people in power do all the time with other people. They like position people against their own interests, and like it carves out more space against them, and then they just like shovel them in there, into like the problem grinder. So I kind of like see it as not being something new. I guess I can also talk about like where I came from. It sounds a lot, really similar to what Barbara was saying in a lot of ways. I am like a little surprised at how little it changes, or how little it had changed between our times of growing up. Because I was brought up in a Jewish community, but also a Zionist community, and we were just taught that like to be Jewish was to be Zionist, and to be like that you really like that you couldn't really like have one without the other or something. And we were taught all these like, really false myths about, Jewish safety being bound to, the existence of the state of Israel, which like, when has that ever proven to be true? Out of all the years, out of all the decades that Israel has been in existence, how have Jews ever been safe because of it? Even the Jewish Zionists are like, we're never safe, not even in Israel. Their narrative is that we're surrounded by all these Arab countries and we're just this little slice and they all want to take it away from us. And it's just, I mean, it's also like growing up as a person who, I mean, being raised in the United States too, being fed the same lies about this land that we're on, about, like the history starting at a certain point. And before that, we just don't really talk about it. And until you're older, until I was older and started to like, become curious. But even as a child, when I was curious or confused, like sometimes some of it just doesn't like sound right or sit right, or you're like,
right. That was my experience.
You're trying to understand. You're like, I don't understand how all these like, all these like there are lots of Jews who are not white, but in Israel there are a lot of Jews who are white, and I'm like, where did all these white people come from? And all of a sudden they're like playing hand drums and like listening to like Arabic music and eating Arabic food, and I just don't understand. And every time that I would like try and understand as a kid and as a teenager, I was told it's too complicated and nuanced, or it's too complex and nuanced. I would be like, it would be like rapid fire dates in my direction, just like Jewish Zionists with their dates and like, you know, like historical facts. And it's like, but whose history are you even talking about? That's the other thing. It's like, oh, because the British did something, you think that makes it legitimate? I'm sorry, that if you're going to say that, then you're also going to say that like this country is legitimate, which it's not.
Yeah, and you know, I want to kind of chime in a bit, because when you talk about Zionism itself, it's really more political than it is having any spiritual basis. Am I understanding that? Because it was organized, it was politically organized in 1897. So, and I think that this is way after, as far as Israel was not a political party. And I think this is where this all is.
Well, it was never, you know, I'm no expert on Zionism and the history of Zionism, but from what I do understand, I don't think it was ever intended to be religious based at all.
It wasn't. It's political. And that's what I'm trying to get across to our viewers and listeners, is that to understand that this is not a religion. It's not a spiritual, has nothing to do with spirituality. It is strictly a political movement. And am I correct?
Yes, I think you are. And I guess what I'm going to chime in here and see if we can circle back to, rather than focusing on what is Zionism, I'm very interested in how we each perceive our experience here now in this country, with the way in which this notion of anti-Semitism is being used politically here in this country, in the face of, you know, the U.S. empire needing to protect the state of Israel, not because they love the Jews so much, but it's because the geopolitics of where Israel happens to be situated in the world, and the political relationships between those who are in the leadership of the Israeli state and the United States. You know, the U.S. needs Israel for that, in order to keep its power maintained in that part of the world. So that being said, how do we see, and how can we come up with a way to confront how this notion of anti-Semitism is being used politically to perpetuate the support for Israel, and to condemn and criminalize even those of us who are Jewish, who are critical of Israel? We're now, you know, at risk of being, we're already being accused of being anti-Semitic. You know, the students at these universities around the country that have mobilized by the thousands to take a stand and to fight against this horrible genocide, it's all in the media. It's being described as, these are all Jew haters. These are all violent anti-Semites who are organizing in support of Palestine and against Zionism. And it's just distorting the narrative so horribly that I think it's incumbent upon us as progressive Jews to figure out how we can push that back and play a different role here. So
yeah, I think another part of what makes it so unfortunate and dangerous is that oh, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That part of what makes it, like, one aspect of it being so bad is that it also distorts like real anti-Semitism and gives us no language for real anti-Semitism when we do it and when it does occur.
Which then fuels the flames of real anti-Semitism and what we can see coming down the road here, with a very distinct likelihood that if certain people are put in power here, we're going to see real fascism here.
Yeah.
I mean, and then all those right-wingers who are
here.
saying, you know, you're anti-Semitic, they're going to be that. They're going to come after the Jews just like they're going to come after the Black people, and they're going to come after the gay people, and they're going to come after the feminists, and they're going to come after everybody who, you know, in their philosophy and ideology don't have the right to exist.
Yeah, so it's, in a way, I guess the way I'm looking at it too is it's kind of weaponizing, using it against political opponents as a weapon.
Right.
Is that what you know?
Yeah. And we
definitely.
see it being thrown at students and pro-Palestinian activism. It's being used against faculty. It's being used to threaten faculty that it's creating a censorship, a level of destroying freedom of speech, because you're so afraid that if you say something, you can lose your job and be accused of anti-Semitism because you are criticizing the military of Israel. You're criticizing a genocide of almost 40,000 people now. In Israel, you're criticizing an apartheid situation and a colonial settler situation that is so oppressive and so brutal. But teachers are frightened to speak out. We see that administrators of major colleges that are trying to stand up for freedom of speech for their students are being fired. They're losing their jobs because the big funders of like Harvard and these other big universities are pulling out their funds because they are claiming that the administrators and the faculty are anti-Semitic because they're standing up for freedom of speech and they're standing up for the rights of their Palestinian students. So this is a really dangerous precedent that we're seeing, because instead of really targeting real anti-Semitism, which is hatred of Jewish people because they're Jewish, and it's another form of racism, but it's being used in a way that's creating more fascism and more censorship and more loss of freedoms in our society. And so it's so very dangerous, not just in our society, because this is happening all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so many people who are like, you know, I mean, Jewish people do have a lot of trauma, like intergenerational trauma, and like, you know, how we were raised, like learning about the things that we learn about, and like, you know, being taught the position that we're taught that we have. It's like we carry a lot of like trauma and grief that hasn't really been like unpacked or sorted through or healed or anything. And so people are really afraid. And I think that when they see their enemies, like their obvious enemies, using words like anti-Semitism, they feel seen. They feel seen, and they feel like finally their struggle is getting the attention that it deserves. And, you know, and that's really scary too. Like I mean, it's like really twisted.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like your worst enemy. It's like white Christian nationalists. Like it's actual literal fascists. It's like Nazis under a new name are talking about anti-Semitism, and we're like, oh my God, we feel seen. Finally, our struggle is getting the attention that it, you know, we're like, you know, it's like, that is not the key to our safety. That is not, that's a trap. That's a trap. And yeah, it's just really sad to it's yeah, and just like on a personal level, it's like so sad to like watch the community. I don't know if you guys feel like this at all, but like watching the communities that we come from, watching the families that raised us like align themselves with the problem, like and not really being able to take that leap of like moving past it and like rejecting it. And it is really hard to do that. It is really hard to, but it's like, kind of sickening to see, family and communities that we come from just like think that we're like self-hating Jews or something.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah,
look at the just one small example of what you're talking about, Hannah. Look at the role that Senator Elise Stefanik has been playing in all of a sudden becoming sort of the hero for the anti-Semit and, for the pro-Jewish movement, or, she's the person who's going to protect the Jews from anti-Semitism, when she has a glaringly horrible history as anti-Semitic herself. She has no love for the Jewish people. This is not a truly humane strategy or agenda that she's on. This is a complete opportunistic political use of how to weaponize the phrase in order to go after the progressive movement for social change and social justice in this country. So
yeah, I was in my research, was really diving into this, and personally, I feel that any group that has to, it's like you have to be great. The only way to be great, the only way to have significance is at somebody else's expense, at another person's or another group's expense. If you got to do that, if that is the key, if that is the only thing you're doing, we are already committing a rights violation. It's already inhumane, and I was looking at the deflection of the anti-Semitism, and I just want to say this quote. It says, "These groups attempt to deflect attention away from their own problematic elements." So they're focusing on, they don't want people to see what's really going on. They don't want people to see the hidden agendas that exist beyond this narrative. And I think that, because politically, they got to get people on their side politically, so that, and the question is why? Why? What is the real agenda?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Because the US wants to do what it wants to do. But in this scenario, they get to say the Jews are the ones doing the genocide. And so like they get to use the Jews as a scapegoat. It's like the perfect deal for empire.
Yeah, it's they're coming at it. It's coming at us from both directions. If allowed to continue in the path that it's on. And that's a recipe for just allowing fascism to prevail.
Right. And fascism, which really exhibits real anti-Semitism, the kind of hatred and targeting of Jews because of their religion, because they're Jewish, and
or just because of their cultural ethnic identity.
Right. And the rise of that kind of anti-Semitism is so dangerous. It's just another type of racism, and the kind of thing that this country has been built on, racist genocides of anyone who isn't white and Christian and male. So we've seen it with the genocide of the indigenous population, the Native Americans in this country, and the erasure of their culture and their history and their rights. And we've seen it with African Americans and the slavery and the discrimination and bigotry that's gone on from generation to generation. So that's the real dangerous kind of fascism and racism that anti-Semitism is part of. And what they're trying, and what is being done to weaponize it, is to change this around to masquerade as progressive when it really is not. It's so dangerous, and using our criticism and our activism for human rights and for against a genocide to define that as being anti-Semitic. And now they're trying to put it into law as well. So we might want to talk a little bit about how the so-called definitions of anti-Semitism are being twisted into law to make it even more dangerous to speak out in favor, in support of Palestinian rights and justice.
Yeah, and at the same time, it's like the society that we are living in, like the way that our social and economic system is built, it's in a way where it actually like hinges on there being genocide. Like it can't exist without genocide. It was built on genocide, and it needs to continually grow, because that's like the myth, like that's what it's built to do, is to just continue to grow. And it can only do that by committing genocide. And like the economy can only function if we have weapons manufacturers. Like the whole thing, it's not for us. None of it is for us. And the people who it's for, like, I mean, you know, we can you know, try to, you know, we can talk about calling our representatives, you know, that's, I'm not saying not to do that, but I am saying that at the end of the day, their job isn't to work for us. And we all know that. And the people who they work for, their interest is in genocide, because they're not just genociding human people, they're genociding the planet. Every time they go in and blow up a city and erase it, they're also blowing up the olive groves, and they're, you know, like they're committing genocide on all the people of a place, and not just the human people. And our economy is oriented toward that. Like that's what it's actually built on, and that's the pattern it plays, and it requires genocide. And so like, you know, until we figure out how to solve that problem, which obviously is like not easy. I think the last time people actually got close to trying to solve that problem through like peasant uprisings, that's like why we have modern day capitalism, was like a response to that. They're like, oh, you didn't like that? Well, we'll give you this instead, where you like actually are stuck and cannot resist.
Well, that's another whole topic of conversation, I think, the historical origins of capitalism.
But I just think it's like actually the same thing. It's like, you know, like we talk about anti-Semitism, and we're talking about this genocide in Palestine, and it's like it really won't, it can't be different if the thing that causes it isn't different. Like if there's not a genocide here, there's going to be a genocide there. And if there's not a genocide there, it's going to be over here. And when they find something new that they want, it's going to be over there. And when they run through the people and the labor, it's either going to be genocide or enslavement. But like it's never just going to be people being free and liberated.
Yeah. It's almost like I said earlier, that someone has to benefit at somebody else's demise, which is not true. It's not a true statement.
Right.
And I think sometimes historically, knowing that there was a time before before this idea of this political division, and where people actually lived peacefully together. There was more than a couple of religions in Israel for a long period of time before.
Well, it was Palestine then.
In Palestine.
I mean, in Palestine. I'm sorry, in Palestine. But there were more than just. I'm just saying, there's more than one different religion, more than one different kind of people who were there, and
Like for
They
many
never talk
generations.
about that.
I think
I'm sorry, did
Barbara's
I go
trying
out
to
for a minute?
speak, and she might be frozen. Barbara,
I think am I okay
Well,
now?
I'm sorry, my internet is coming in and out. I was
Can you
just
repeat
saying
it,
that-
Barbara?
What's that?
Can you repeat what you just said, because we missed it?
Yeah, I said all these different religions and different diversity of people live side by side in peace for generations, not just
Yes.
in Palestine, but in different countries in the Middle East and in parts of Africa and Morocco and Ethiopia, and the settler colonial
Projects
of like England and the Dutch and states of coming into all this and oh yeah, you can have this land. I'm going to give you this land. It's mine now. I'm going to pull all the resources out, and then deciding who is going to have control of the land so that they can still pull the resources out.
Yeah.
And that,
I mean, the history of the state of Israel is one of recurrent occupation since the time when Palestine existed in peace and independently. It's just been carving up and making claims for political statehood and political boundaries. And it was all, it had nothing to do with truly supporting the rights of Jews, of Jewish people. It was more of a convenient political opportunity to, here's a way we can put the Jews who are escaping from the Holocaust without having to bring them here and carve out a state that they can go have themselves, and they would do our bidding. They will be there available for us to exploit the resources, control the oil, control the land, and just push these non-entity people, the Palestinian people, out of existence because they're just in the way. But meanwhile, circling back now, how the right wing here in this country, and I know, Hannah, we're sort of going back and forth between the larger picture and the current moment. But you can't get to the larger picture without surviving the current moment. And so I think at this time, it might be useful, Barbara, since you have it in front of you, to educate our listeners and watchers, our audience, about what this proposed legislation is on this newly broadened definition of anti-Semitism that will make every one of us sitting in this conversation anti-Semites. So and then we can talk for a few minutes, I guess, I'm proposing about, where we go with that. What would be an action plan we might talk about?
Right. I would also like to, before we jump into what some countries are trying to make as a legal definition of anti-Semitism that can be very, very dangerous, let me just say that the Judaism that I believe in values every life, every single life, and to not speak out to the of so many thousands of children and human.
We're losing you.
I know I'm freezing and coming in and out. I am compelled to speak out against the genocide and the brutality. My Jewish traditions of valuing every life, of caring for people, of treating people equally and loving people equally is totally destroyed by this genocide. And I have to speak out for it, whether I'm going to be accused of being a Jew hater or anti-Semitic. This is what I absolutely, this is what I absolutely have to do. And I think that's the case with all of us here. When we see an injustice, an oppression, a brutality, a violence, we see how much power and money and military might and how destructive that is and how it's being used against innocent civilians, we have to speak out. We can't do anything but speak out against it and do everything that we can. So let me, should I now go back to what you requested me and hope that I don't get kicked off the internet, because my internet has been horrible. So the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, which is a number of countries from all over the world, have came together to put together a statement about anti-Semitism that that some countries have been adopting legally, and the United States is trying to do this too. And some of it makes sense, but some of it has a very dangerous connotation, and it will silence critics of the Israeli government. So it reads as this: anti-Semitism.
Before you start reading it, are you reading? So you're talking about the definition that was put out by the International Holocaust.
Yes, the IHRA, which is what our government is adopting. They may have changed a little bit of the language, but I haven't been able to find that language. If you can look for it, that would be great. But I think what they're adopting is basically this language.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what's being put up for adoption.
I believe so, but if anybody can put into, do we have a chat on Facebook, or does anybody know any other information? We'll have to try to correct ourselves if this is wrong, if there's a different.
Well, we can add to this on our website at mchr.org. So
Okay.
you can add even afterwards, but go ahead and read that definition. It's very important for our listeners to hear.
Congress has adopted this, and it's now it's being pushed into the Senate to adopt this as a legal definition. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. So now, limitations of this language and what interpret a way would give people the right to legal right to say you're being Israeli.
I think we're losing Barbara. So I'm going to just sort of pick up on where I see the language from the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance being further expanded on by Congress, because what they've added, the language they've added to the Senate bill, if signed into law, would broaden the legal definition of anti-Semitism to include, and I quote, the targeting of the state of Israel conceived as a Jewish collectivity. And so by inserting that language, they are transforming anti-Semitism into any criticism of Israel. That becomes a crime and subject to all kinds of consequences. And that's
what creates a lot of anti-Semitism, I think, is like when institutions and when like the dominant narratives conflate Zionism and Jewishness, and then the state of Israel does a genocide, and you've just conflated Zionism and Judaism. So like now everyone thinks that Jews are responsible for this genocide. Like that's not a good look for the Jews.
Yeah.
That's an understatement. Yeah. I mean, that is exactly where I see this moving is it feeds into the flames of anti-Semitism. It does not reduce anti-Semitism. It expands it. It enlarges it. And it gives those real anti-Semites a ton of ammunition for them to justify whatever actions they want to take against Jewish people who are critical of Israel, or even not at this point, Yeah,
it's used to suppress, this will suppress freedom of speech academic freedom. And it just undermines any effort of us coming together as a people,
It also,
you know, as human beings.
Barbara,
What were you going to say? Go ahead, Barbara.
and organizations that have in contracts that you must pledge allegiance to Israel, that you agree that you will not boycott Israel, that you will not criticize Israel. And there have been court cases where people have refused to sign contracts with cities and municipalities in Arkansas and Texas. So there's really, this is such a dangerous precedent. Why on earth would you have to? And I think Michigan actually has something on the books as well, but it's not been enforced. Why would you have to pledge allegiance to Israel and sign a contract with a government, if you're doing work for a government, that says you won't criticize Israel or you won't boycott Israeli goods? That is a real restriction on freedom, our freedoms.
Yes.
Right,
yes.
because like Israel is like just the United States, like dorky little brother, you know, like they're like, don't say anything. You have to pledge your allegiance to them because it's the same interests.
Yeah, almost like a big brother, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. I just don't understand why they have healthcare and we don't.
Free and education, free education.
That's a really interesting question, actually.
Yeah. That'll be another topic.
Another thing
Israel's such a great model for this country. Why the heck doesn't this country adopt universal health care?
You know, I've been targeted with a lot of like Zionist propaganda on social media and stuff. I don't know why. They're very confused about my identity. And a lot of the propaganda ads are like, come volunteer in Israel. You know, it hasn't been, you know, they're like struggling so much after October 7th. Like, and they show all these like young hot people like sorting through strawberries and like having fun with their new friends. It's like the same emotional manipulation that they do on Birthright, but it's like for older people and like you know, for like 18 to 30 or something like that, or 45 or it's some new bracket. And I'm like, what is up with all this like agricultural work? And I think it has something to do with the fact that like Palestinians had been like enslaved and like doing like shitty wage labor. Sorry, am I allowed to swear on here? Like bad like wage labor, like agricultural work that like, you know, no one else wanted to do, probably very underpaid. Like I learned a little bit about like some of the labor practices in Israel and how they interact with Palestinians there, and also with migrant workers from elsewhere too. And actually, like on October 7th, I happened to be listening to some news in the aftermath, and one of the stories was like about migrant workers from some other country who were there and couldn't their boss like wouldn't send a car for them, so they were like stranded. And I was like, right, your boss isn't going to send a car, and like, you know, the boss isn't going to send a car for you because you're just like you're a slave. You're here
expendable.
You're expendable. You're just they put you on one side of the machine, and on the other side of the machine, they take dollars out. So like, they're not going to go to any effort to keep you safe at all. Because not because they're like traitorous, filthy Jews, but because they're capitalists. Like that's because they have their eye on the profit, and because that's how the system is designed. So we like betray ourselves and each other at every turn, every opportunity. So that's all that was. But I was like noticing all of this like advertisement and propaganda about like coming to volunteer in Israel doing like migrant labor, and I'm like, I was just like, oh, because like things are hard for you, not because all your young people are like off at war like killing each other with friendly fire, but because your wage labor class is like no longer available because you're genociding them. And that's sick.
Wow. Oh, that's an aha moment for a lot of people I know.
So in the remaining time that we have, maybe we could shift a little bit into where we're going and what do we see and how do we encourage those of you who are watching this podcast to take some action, both in the short term and the long term. I know, Hannah, there's a certain what seems like meaninglessness behind calling your state, your Congress people, but at the same time, it's not that we're going to convince them of anything. It's that we need to pressure them to do the right thing. And we need to make sure they understand that their constituents are not going to vote for them if they support this draconian direction that we're heading into, not least of which is the expansion of this definition of anti-Semitism to make us all anti-Semitic.
Right.
Yes.
So the alternative is to support candidates that do support a ceasefire, who do speak out for the liberation of Palestinians and all oppressed people.
And who are not anti-Semitic.
What's that?
And are not anti-Semitic, despite being accused of being anti-Semitic.
Yeah, and that would actually be like an interesting thing to try and like articulate for people, like how to tell the difference. Like, because sometimes it's a little murky.
That's what prompted this.
Right.
Me feeling.
I mean, I think it's murky for people from where I come from, my family that I come from, most of them. I think it's like a little bit murky. It's like, because they're fearful and they're traumatized, and then they hear someone speaking to their struggle and they feel seen and validated, and like there's safety in that, except it's like it's their worst nightmare, actually enticing them.
Well, and then we can get this out.
What? Yeah, sorry.
We can share this conversation. So I know many people have gotten a lot of education if they just listen and take a look at tonight's conversation, because it is rehumanizing human rights, and we are taking action. So let's give out some more pointers. You were saying about contacting the our legislators and telling them, look, what do you stand for? I think you're right. We got to make sure we're not walking around and giving our vote to the wolf in sheep's clothing.
That's true. I mean, we do, even though it feels helpless sometimes to be called just and demanding that our legislators support a ceasefire, that they vote against this horrible bill that would institutionalize a false anti-Semitic law. We can't be silent. We have to be vocal on all fronts, not being afraid to talk to people who disagree with us, having those tough conversations with our families who are still in a Zionist frame of mind and think that we are that we've lost our minds, are calling us Jews. Continue to form alliances with people who are fighting and educating ourselves. We've got to read. We've got to go listen to people who know more than we do. We need to get out on the streets and protest. We need to use every tool and tactic we can to change what's happening in the world and try to save lives. And fight against fascism, the rise of fascism, the rise of real anti-Semitism. We've got to fight against it every way we can.
Yeah. And
I think, is being able to articulate clearly to those who are being sucked in to this false narrative and clarify we're not saying anti-Semitism doesn't exist. Clearly it does. And it's a very dangerous movement, just like the white supremacy movement in this country is a very dangerous movement. But we need to figure out how we can clarify what is anti-Semitism and what isn't, and not fall prey to the historic tactic that's used of dividing people by somehow convincing groups of people that what's totally against their own interest is really in their interest, because that has happened historically in this country and around the world, and we need to stop it.
Yeah. You would think by now we would have learned some lessons. And after so many years, I think now I'm at the point where any human being is inhumane. If you're putting people in so many subgroups, what they're saying now is that this is causing, the true meaning, like you said, is being eroded. The polarization and division is overshadowing real political maneuvers. And then it undermines the legitimate concerns of the people. That our concerns, and I, as a part of Michigan Coalition for Human Rights, and in any organization that I'm in, the rights of the people, we're not being heard. And this is another ploy. It's another ploy. So,
and it's
you guys want to?
formulaic too. So it's really formulaic. Just how there's the formula of pitting one group of people against another group, and pitting a group against its own interests. Those are formulas we've seen, but also the formula of specifically taking a phrase or a word and draining it of its meaning and using it against, and also making it we see the same thing with the word violence, BDS was violent, or just marching is violent, and so it's treated like it's violence, but then
and terrorist, that's another word, terrorist.
Yeah. Terrorist. Hostage or prisoner, it's a hostage if it's an Israeli that was taken by a Palestinian, but a government. But then it's a prisoner if it's a Palestinian being held hostage by an Israeli government.
Yeah.
Words.
Yeah.
Words.
Dehumanizing human beings, dehumanizing people is a way. Dehumanizing Palestinians, dehumanizing people of color, dehumanizing anyone, Native Americans. That was the excuse that you could get rid of them, that you could destroy their culture, take their land, because you are of a higher, more supreme level, and you're civilized. So you're coming in with civilization and getting rid of people who are barbaric. And that's a horrible, changing history and
yeah. And as Jews, as survivors of genocidal violence, we know that rhetoric. We were taught that rhetoric from a young age. We hear it and it's oh, this sounds familiar. We've heard this before.
Right.
But you would think that we wouldn't do the same, that Jewish people wouldn't do the same thing to another group of people because they experience that kind of trauma. How could they possibly reconfigure it and subjugate other human beings in the way that they were, the way they were?
You have to die.
Yeah, and this is something that Tia has been saying a couple of times, is this thing about I think this is something that Adrienne Marie Brown talked about once, about entitlement. Make a list of everything that you think you're entitled to in the world, you're entitled to breathe air, you're entitled to drink water, you're entitled to exist in your body the way that it is if you want to, and make a list of everything that you think you're entitled to. And then if there's anything on that list that you don't think everyone is entitled to, then it means you're not actually entitled to it. And so when you have that in your mind, you're oh, you can't actually craft freedom or safety at the expense of someone else's freedom of safety or safety. It doesn't exist. That's not how it works. It will never work. It'll always be a facade, and it'll always be not real.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness. This conversation, you guys, we're going to have to probably do this again. We got some things. I mean, this is a much needed conversation. Our time is up, but I am just so excited that you were able to join us this evening. And I just want to let you know we are so grateful. And anyone interested in becoming a part of Michigan Coalition for Human Rights, please don't hesitate. Go to mchr.org and become a member. Join the conversation. Link up with our brothers and sisters who are out here taking action against inhumane acts, not only in the United States, not only in Michigan, but all over the world. Ladies, I love each and every one of you. My heart goes out to you. And thank you, thank you, thank you for the work that you do. And I hope to be seeing you real soon. Peace and
Thank
Thank
blessings.
you. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.